Go.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Ken, and I'm a teacher who's doing watercolor workshops for adults now. I taught public school art and special education for over 30 years. So I've taught from kindergarten through 12th grade. I'm now to the point where I can pick and choose when I'm doing workshops, and I'm really enjoying doing the adult workshops that I'm working on now. We're going to do a 4-week session here, and we'll move through lots of different steps and techniques in the art of watercolor painting. But anyway, hot press is a smooth surface. The medium textured surface is called cold press, and that's what I usually use. This is Arch's brand. There's lots and lots of really good professional brands of watercolor paper. Arch's is my go-to, and these papers come in different weights. So this is a 140-pound weight, which from what I understand is basically the weight of a roll of this paper. And so it's fairly thin, but it's incredibly durable. This painting that I did for the sample has the still life that Jeannie just shared on the back of it, because I had 3 versions of it. So I took my least favorite of those 3 versions and painted on the other side, and you can't see it. It's amazing how, you get what you pay for. So if you buy good materials, you'll get better results. And the third type of surface is the rough, and it's exactly what it sounds like. And if you have a technique where you're not trying to get into lots of small details, but you want to use textures and that fits your style, then the rough paper would be a good choice to go with. So this is 140-pound Arches cold pressed watercolor paper. And in the other class that we just finished up in January, I was touting that, oh yeah, you can buy a block for $100 and you get 20 sheets. So they're $5 a sheet. Well, I got online and I started looking, and that was the old days. It's gone up big time. So I ended up buying this size. So that was for the 18 by 24 that it used to be $100. I think it's now like 130, 150, something like that. So anyway, I went down in size and got the 12 by 16 inch block. This is a block of the paper, by the way, so if you haven't bought a block before, they're glued together. So in other words, there are 20 sheets of watercolor paper in here, but they're glued all the way around. And there's a little slot right up here, and that's where you put your palette knife, and you can just pull 1 sheet at a time off of this. Now, just something to think about. This is held in place by this adhesive or the glue that's around the edge of this. So it sort of works like a stretched piece of watercolor paper, but it's technically not stretched. What stretched watercolor paper is it's been soaked so that the sizing inside of the paper has absorbed all that water. You drip most of the water off and place it on a board. And let me just really quickly talk about this board also. This is made by a company called Grafix, Grafix, and it's called Incredible Board. And you can get this online. You can get it in a couple of days here from Amazon. And it comes in a variety of sizes. So you can get a piece of this board that's twice as big as this, which would fit a full sheet of watercolor paper. Or this one I just cut it in half, and you can buy it in a smaller size also. But anyway, this has a foam core and a resistant outer, and you can use either side or both sides at the same time if you want. And you put your wet paper on top of this. You take a stapler, which I have around here somewhere, and you start from the center of each side and just staple out towards the edges. It's like stretching a canvas for acrylic or oil painting, except you're stretching your watercolor paper. And then what you do is just let it dry. And as it dries, it will tighten, just like a drum skin. It'll get, if you do this halfway decently, it's pretty forgiving. You'll get a nice flat surface that will serve you really well. You won't get buckling, you won't get wrinkling. as you work on your painting. So it's kind of like flossing, you know, you don't always do it, but you really probably should. It's one of those kind of things. And I pretty much always stretch watercolor paper now. So if you're interested and you don't have any professional grade, I've got these for sale for $5. So I've got these right up here if you want one. As far as paints, same thing. You know, you're going to get results with professional paints better than student grade. So when you look online to buy the paints, you're going to see student grade, and then you'll see professional, and it's pretty much self-explanatory. The more expensive paints will do you well. The three brands that I'm using are the Winsor Newtons, and I've used these for years. I would recommend pick a brand and go with it and kind of learn it. The Mission Magellos are fantastic. They're really fun. And then the Daniel Smith are also really excellent, top quality paints. So I say pick a brand, buy the basics and learn them, and then you can expand from there. Favorite brushes that I recommend, the Silver Black Velvets. And that was on the supply list. If you haven't tried them, they're pricey, but you get what you pay for there too. Any questions about materials or stretching or any of those things? All right, guys. So let me talk a little bit about the subject. This was down on the east end of the river walk in the fall, and I took a whole bunch of pictures down there because it was a beautiful fall day. I liked kind of what was happening with the lighting, and just what I do is I take photos all the time, and I've got a file on my computer that I just call subjects for paintings. And if I think there's something in a photo, I'll just put it in that file and just leave it there, and just kind of, you know, when I'm looking around for ideas, go back to that file. So I came back to this one. This was the photo, and this was the end result with the painting. So, you know, it's not exactly the same, clearly, but it gave me the inspiration to get it going. So this is a fairly simple composition. It's a lot. The drawing or the painting that we did last time that Jeannie shared was much more complex, and we did the drawing very precisely. This one is literally going to be the horizon line, and we may just kind of sketch in the shoreline. So it's going to be super simple. So I'll do a demo up here to get you started with the first step, and then you guys can go back and just draw that line and get your things set up. So if you will come up closer, we'll get started. We'll fit into an 11 by 14 inch mat, and that's another thing over the years that I've learned is how expensive it is to present watercolors. You know, if you bring it to a professional framer, if you get out of the shop with a mat and a frame and glass, you're at least $200. And you know, it can easily go higher than that. I've spent $300 plus on bigger paintings. So I'm trying to keep the price point down on my paintings so that people can buy them. And you know, so someone does say, "I'll give you $100 for your painting," and you think I have a $100 piece of glass on the painting. So this will fit into an 11 by 14 inch mat, which then fits into the 16 by 20 inch frame. And the one issue that you always have to think about with watercolor is UV protection. You know, is it going to last? So what you can do with that is this spray varnish that's a UV block will help you out with that. I gave this one probably 4 to 5 light coats with this. There's a couple of things to keep in mind is I've noticed, especially if you have black, like the background that we did with the last painting, you're going to see speckles. And when the first time I did this, I thought, oh, I just ruined the whole painting. But if you're patient, it usually dissipates. It kind of goes away. So a light coat in a well-ventilated area, and give it like 4 or 5 coats, and you can see it, but it doesn't change the image. And you can also feel it on the texture of the paper. You'll know you have enough coats on it when you get this built up a little bit. So this will protect your painting. The other thing that you can do is you can buy a UV blocking glass, but then your price point starts creeping up again. So this is just regular glass that came with a Michaels frame. I think this whole setup here is about $70. So much, 1/3 what you would normally end up spending. Okay, so you know, whatever subject you're doing, if you want to draw something, you can draw right onto watercolor paper. So all that I'm going to do is just on this painting, just kind of define where my horizon line is going to be. And it's, you know, this one's pretty close to the center. I usually try to avoid the very center, but I'm going to move it up or down a little bit, probably go just a little bit above the center. And so I'm just going to kind of give myself a guideline, and just, this doesn't have to be real precise. As long as it's roughly level, you're going to be in good shape. So that's how we're starting. Just a horizontal line just slightly above the midline will be our horizon. Okay. In watercolor painting, there are 3 basic techniques. Within these techniques, there's lots and lots of other techniques, but we're just going to talk about wet on wet first. And so what that means is wet paper and a brush loaded with water and pigment. So wet on wet. The other technique that's very effective is wet brush on dry paper. That'll give you a much more intense, more almost like a more opaque look to the watercolor painting. And we'll do some of that with this painting, not a lot. And then the dry brush is where the paper's dry and the brush is mostly dry. And I used a little bit of dry brush to do the grasses and the leaves on this painting. So as we go through them, I'll talk about those techniques. But I'm going to start with wet on wet. So I've got, I want to talk a little bit about my palette. I have a new palette, which I love. Excuse me. You're fine. And I think I got this on Amazon. You can get it at Dick Blick or any of the art supply stores. This is the Magello Studio palette. And this is the thing that I got smart about finally. I made a diagram so I know what color is where, because I've got palettes at home where, you know, you look at some of these colors, you're like, I have no idea which one of these browns is which, because they look very much alike. So anyway, do a diagram when you get your new palette if you do that. The other trick is this is a puppy training pad, and Cheryl's not here today, but she suggested using these, and I just keep it, I use it as my paper towel all the time, so I've got all kinds of, you know, dirty colors mixed up there. All right, so here we go. I've got a 1-inch brush. You could do this, you could spritz this to wet your paper. Just get some water on the paper, quite a bit, and then work that in. And I also, you know, if that's taking forever, get a bigger brush. This is a 2-inch. And I'm just kind of cross-hatching. And you want to give it a few moments to kind of work into the fiber. And this good quality paper has that internal sizing, so it's going to hold the moisture. So that's good. And then you can usually just kind of tip your paper in the light and kind of see. I probably missed a spot or two, but as long as it's generally covered, that's all you need. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to have a glow that's here that's also going to be reflected in the water. So I'm basically going to leave this white. So I'm going to work from white over here and just go into blue in the sky. I'm not going to worry too much about the gold yet, but the gold is what's going to really give this a glow. And surprise, surprise, it's quinacridone gold is what I use for that. So I'm going to start with some blues. So I've got cerulean blue, which is a wonderful sky color. And this is Winsor Newton. And the thing I love about the Winsor Newton cerulean blue is it granulates. It separates and creates really cool looking textures. So it's just a very light sky blue. And I'm going to mix up some other blues here. Let me get a slightly smaller brush. This one is this is a Dick Blick brand, but this is Sable. So this is these are expensive brushes. These synthetic brushes, the silver black velvets, they come to a really fine point, so you can do a lot of detail work with this. These rounds are really nice for washing, like we're going to be doing here. So I'm going to go into ultramarine. And ultramarine is a very beautiful blue. And then indigo. Indigo is super dark, but mixed with these colors, I think it'll work for what I want. Okay, so I've mixed together those three colors. I've got cerulean. Well, I haven't mixed the cerulean with the other two yet. So cerulean, indigo, and ultramarine. Okay, so let's come over here. I'm going to kind of start from this upper corner. And this again is wet on wet. Now, a couple of things about watercolor is that as this dries, it's going to be less intense, so it's not going to be as bright, and it's going to be lighter. It's not going to be as dark as it looks, so you kind of have to factor in that quality with watercolors. I should have drawn this line right here also to kind of separate the shoreline, so I'm just going to do this. I'm going to go from here to about right here. So I'm going to leave this white and just do the water down here. One bit of advice is generally work with the biggest brush that's appropriate for the application that you're doing. So, don't start, when you get into a smaller brush, like I was working with this one right here for this wash, it was too small. So just use the biggest brush that's appropriate for what you're trying to accomplish. So as I come over towards this side, I'm just going to dilute this and basically go into white. Now I'm going to have foliage over the top of this, but it'll easily cover this light blue. So I'm just going to come right down to the line, and then I'm adding more water to this to keep this basically white right in here. And I want a little bit of blue in the corner.
May I take a picture?
Sure.
Real quick?
Yeah.
Oops.
I'm just going to continue. I'll definitely have foliage down here, but this blue is so light that it'll work just fine. I haven't done the cerulean, so I'm going to grab some cerulean blue, and you can layer colors quite easily with watercolor. So let's put some cerulean over that ultramarine and indigo mix. Now you can see I got a little bit of a valley or a little buckling there, and that was just my stretching of the watercolor paper wasn't perfect, but this will settle down again as it dries. So that's kind of the whole crux of this first step. We're just trying to get a base coat on here. This is going to continue to kind of do its thing, so I love some of just these subtle little things that'll start to happen. But again, most of this is going to look lighter and less bright, or it's not bright, but it'll actually just be duller looking, not quite as vibrant as it dries. And we'll talk about glazing. So we will punch this up. We'll be using golds and lots of other colors in this, but this is just the very first step. So your horizon line and then that kind of diagonal. And I'll come around and check on you. And if you need material or you need help getting your paper set up, that's what we'll do now. With you individually. So don't panic. But if you're ready for a cloud, come on up. It's very simple. He said. Okay, so we started with a wet on wet wash. Sorry, all the time. Okay, when Val films this, then we look at all the work that she does, and we were saying everything was going good until you picked everything up and thought you were helping out, and that was the worst part of the video. So Now I see.
Wow.
I don't learn. I'm a slow learner, I guess. All right, so this is still damp. This is still, because it's good quality paper, it's holding some moisture, but I don't think it's wet enough to do what I want it to do. So what I have here is basically clear water. There may be a little bit of blue, and either it's fine if there's some pigment in this. So I'm just gonna re-wet the paper a little bit. And the clouds are really only over on the upper left sky is where you're going to see them. You don't have to worry about clouds in the water. You could, but I'm not going to worry about that. And this is going to be covered with foliage. So I just need a couple of little suggestions of clouds. So I re-wet the paper. I'm going to go to a smaller brush. I'm going to pick up some indigo blue. And I'm just going to lay in basically like 3 clouds. Now, this is a super strong blue, so as I get closer to my light source, I'm going to go a little bit more into the ultramarine. Now, the beauty with watercolors is they will work their magic. So you laid in some pigment, but it's not finished. It's gonna work and work some magic for you. Now this is laying on color, wet and wet. There's another technique called lifting, where you just take a tissue and you can lift up the pigment at this point. So if you want a little bit of, let's say we want some lightness under the clouds, or we want to reshape the clouds, you can lift. So see how that's picking up. It's not doing much. I mean, it's not giving me a real bright glow on the clouds. It is definitely reshaping the clouds. But now the other thing that you can do is let gravity help you out a little bit too. So you can tip your board. Let the water flow a little bit, but it's diffusing, and that's just going to give us this suggestion of clouds. So I might drop in a little bit more with a very subtle bit of blue over here. So there's no right or wrong with how dark or light the clouds are, or how many you put in. Just go with what you feel. You can see right there where I lifted that pigment, I also lifted the water, and so it's kind of created a strange little circle. I'm just going to charge that with a little more pigment and just let that fill in. So that's all there is to it, just the idea. This one looks so much darker. I think I'm going to darken that one a little bit, maybe that one too. Also, if you drop a lot of water into this, you're going to get a bloom, one of these little guys. You could get one of these little things happening, which isn't a bad thing, but just be aware of it. That's where the water is pushing the pigment away. Some people don't like or they try to avoid them, depending on what you're going for. I think sometimes they can just make a watercolor look like a watercolor.
Yeah. What kind of board is that?
This is watercolor paper mounted on a board, like an acrylic board. And we'll have, Val's going to help me. I'll show you how to do this. It's got several steps, and you use a wax medium, and you can avoid needing glass. So it's a great way to have a glass-free watercolor.
It has a nice look to it.
Yeah, it's very different. You spray it and then seal it with the wax medium.
So it's acrylic.
Yeah. Don't worry, because I'm going to come by, but what we're going to do is just kind of lay in some of the foliage in the background. So we're kind of working our way from the back forward. So if you're at a good stopping point, join me for a short demo here. So if you have any hard edges that you're not happy with, like the reason that this cloud has a soft edge and then a harder edge is because the paper was drier over here. And that's just what happens with watercolors. So if you want to soften it, just get some water on a brush, and again, with good watercolor paper, it's very forgiving, usually. So you can just kind of work it, and you can soften this edge. It's not doing much yet, but trust me, it usually works.
So it should be kind of dry when you do that?
It's harder to move it when it's drier, but it'll work.
Oh, okay.
This just happens to be pretty dry right there. So I'm just gonna kind of dab that a little bit. Didn't do a lot, but you can soften edges, so that's the way to do it. One other trick with that, if you are trying to soften an edge, get an older, stiffer bristled brush, like an acrylic brush. I just buy these like at Hobby Lobby. Just buy a pack of cheaper brushes, because if you're using masking fluid, these are you don't want to use your best brushes with masking fluid. Okay, so this is just a student grade stiffer bristled brush. I'm just going to take this, and this will scrub more. It's a stiffer bristle, so it'll scrub a little bit. Not a dramatic difference, but I think you can see that it did kind of soften it. And you could also use this very same technique if you found out, well, I wished I had done more lifting when it was wetter. Well, you can re-wet it a little bit and continue to do some of that lifting. So that's just to point out that you're never completely stuck. You can always come back and salvage things. Okay, so what I want to do now is kind of rough in this line on the horizon that had big cottonwood trees that were kind of starting to turn color. So now we get to get into some color. So I'm going to move over here to the warmer side of the palette. Those of you that have had workshops with me know that this is my go-to warm color, and this is quinacridone gold, and this is the Winsor Newton. Lots of different companies make this color, but I'm used to the Winsor Newton. It looks like a brown when it's in the palette, and it's hasn't been diluted yet, but when you place it on the paper and you dilute it, it turns to a warm gold, and it's very transparent. So it works great for creating a glow. So there's other colors that are similar to this. The New Gamboge, I guess that's how you pronounce it. That's very similar to this color. And then I've just laid out my palette here. So I've got yellow ochre and raw sienna. These two colors will probably be useful for these trees. And then this is, I've got this light yellow, permanent yellow, and cadmium yellow. Cadmium yellow is just the basic go-to yellow. You'll probably use it a lot in painting.
The one before yellow ochre?
There's yellow ochre here. There's raw sienna.
Raw sienna.
Yeah, and it's just a little browner, a little more brown.
Just take a picture. Yeah. Okay. That's a good idea.
Okay, and then another nice color that will work well with this is the Venetian red. It's kind of a brick red. So I'm going to kind of keep this palette fairly simple. So I've got the quinacridone gold, the Venetian red, and we'll go with, let's go with cadmium yellow. Maybe for fun, I'll wet the yellow ochre because that's a nice color. Now, I don't have any green on my palette. But green, and there isn't a whole lot of green in this painting. Green is really a secondary color, which is very simple to mix. So, on the color chart there, because we have yellow and we've got blues, we can make greens very quickly. Now, the quinacridone gold is a form of yellow. So if you take the quinacridone gold and then you grab any blue, let's try cerulean. you'll get a green. So there's a quick way to mix green. If you are going to buy a green, the Viridian is one green that I use a lot. There's lots of others, but again, you can mix all the secondary colors. So violet, orange, and green are very easy to mix. Okay, so let's kind of re-wet our paper again. So we're going back to wet on wet. So the paper's going to be wet. Now, if you want to draw out these trees, you can do that. I don't really feel like it's super important, but let's just kind of get an idea here. It's basically going from taller to shorter, this cluster of trees, because it was kind of going away from you. So I'm just going to use that as kind of a guide. I'm going to put a little bit of pigment on the brush so I can kind of define these shapes. And because I'm doing this as foliage or grass, I'm going to go ahead and just lay down some pigment in here too. So this is the Venetian red. If you don't have Venetian red, if you have a brown and a red, you could easily mix that. Let's just take this red. Oh, this is opera. This opera, if you haven't used it, is super bright. It's pink. It's like this vibrant pink. So if you have a color that's really vibrant and you want to tone it down, go across the color wheel to the opposite side. So if the opera's too bright, get a green. And I just mixed a green here. So you mix those together and it'll dull both colors. And you'll get a tertiary color, kind of an earth color, or you can get mud. So be careful.
It is a river.
Right, we're doing a landscape, so we need some.
Would it make
muddy
your
color.
picture look better if you like blended the blues that you're using and the color to make the green? So that, or would it be? Does that make it better?
It may create a harmony with the colors if you use the same ones, but I don't think it would be a problem to use something different. Now, I did use the cerulean, but I hadn't. Well, you'd have to use a warm color. You'd have to use a yellow to create the green, and we hadn't used any yellow. So probably the short answer is yes, Sandy, because that's what I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't jump to something that was totally different in the blues that we haven't used. It might be a little intense or different. Okay, so I kind of roughed these in. I want this group to be a little bit taller. And I want this to be brighter, so let me get some color going in here. This is that Venetian red again.
Because it's all the chlorophyll is draining out of the trees.
Yep, we want those fall colors happening here. Now, I'm going to jump in the quinacridone gold right now. And so I'm going to layer this in with that Venetian red. So I've got the Venetian red and quinacridone gold. And I'm going more into the glow as I get over here towards the light source. So this is going to be mostly quinacridone gold. And then I'm just going to kind of carry that through onto the ground down here. And then to separate this line right here, I want to go a little bit darker to separate the cottonwood trees from this grass down here. So let's just pick a color. One hint, this goes back to that secondary color thing, or that idea that you dull colors. If you take indigo blue, which is the darkest hue of blue in these watercolors, and because I've got the warm colors towards the opposite, the opposite of blue is orange. So I've got some orange color in here. If I put some blue in here, it's going to be really dark. But it will blend together and should create a tertiary or earthy color. I'm getting some green too, because indigo blue mixed with that gold will create a green. But that's okay, because this was early fall, and I'm okay with that. So I'm going to mix while it's wet here. So I'm taking some more of this quinacridone gold and just mix it in while it's wet.
Wow, that's pretty.
And then if you get a little bit of bleeding, just lift it now. If you're getting pigment somewhere that you don't want it to go necessarily. And then we could really do kind of the same idea along the shoreline here to delineate where the shore hits the water. And I don't want this to look like a pizza slice. I want it to have some organic, you know, some curve to it. So let's just kind of re-wet this. And I want to reflect some of this color into the water anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and apply some water over the top of the colored water. And I'm going to overlap a little bit up onto the land so that I can vary the shoreline. So quinacridone gold. Indigo blue. Now the same idea will apply here. That's really intense right now, but it's going to mellow. It's going to diffuse and be less bright. But at this same point right now, I kind of want to reflect the cottonwood trees in the water. So I'm going to go ahead and go back into that Venetian red and just lay this in while this is wet. And I'm putting a lot of pigment in this right now.
He's so brave. That blue would be scaring the heck out of me. It's scaring me now.
Well, this is because it's wet there, Nancy. It's just gonna kind of, you know, they're gonna blend together. So we've got the blues and the oranges going together, which are opposites.
I trust you.
It's on the water.
With effort.
And I've got some sharp edges here. So what I did is I just stuck my brush into the water, and I'm going to touch
Is
this
that one of
edge.
those black silver ones?
Yeah, the silver black velvets.
Silver black velvet.
Number
Oh, yeah.
number 12.
Number 12.
Yeah, they require get another job.
Second income to buy.
Sell a piece of furniture or something.
But it's worth it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, well worth it.
And with this landform here, I want it to go from dark on the left towards lighter because the light source is over here. So I want this to get a little bit darker. And even though the paper's somewhat moist, I'm going to recharge that or just add more water to it. And let's just stick with the basic same colors. We'll mix up some green. So I've got cerulean blue and quinacridone gold.
Did you say cerulean blue?
Cerulean blue and quinacridone gold.
What they cost it.
They better buy it.
And so as I work my way across here, I want it to be lighter. So you dilute it, dilute your pigment. And then, you know, step back from your work and just don't be, you know, constantly up right against it because you won't get the full view. And then play with this, you know, just decide, is this as dark as you want it to be? I'm going to grab some of this blue that I previously had mixed and darken this a little bit. And that blue is going to mix with the gold and we'll get some greens. And if you want some reds in there, you know, just play around with this at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really getting mud there, but I'm going to use some scumbling, a dry brush technique later to do some grass on this.
What's
So
it called? Scumbling?
scumbling, SCUMBLING, and it's I'll show you how to do it, but it's a dry brush technique where you kind of drag your brush over the dry surface and create textures. Okay, so this is interesting. I'm kind of liking some of the stuff that's going on there. I'm not finished up here, and I don't like the tops of the trees, so I'm going to maybe go to I'm going to get a round brush. The numbers have worn off of this. This is probably a 8. Yeah, it is. So this is this size of a round brush. I'm going to try to get some just the indication that this isn't so solid, that there are branches and areas that break up a little bit. So I'm just kind of touching this. This is more of almost a dry brush technique. The paper is pretty much dry up here. And the quinacridone gold will be fantastic for this. So I'm just going to soften the edge a little bit like this. And as I get further over here, you want it to be very light. That's too much. And then later, after this dries, we can suggest a few tree trunks in here. And we can do much more with this area. Just a little hard to see, but I did a little bit of texturing right here later to get the idea that there's some foliage or grass in there. I kind of have some more darks in the original up here, so we haven't touched any browns. If you pick up a brown that's got a little bit of a red to it, burnt sienna does. So that one, I think is right. No, it's right here.
What is it?
It's called burnt sienna.
Yes.
And burnt sienna is similar to the quinacridone gold. It's just darker. But this would be a great color to get some darks in those trees, especially over here. And if I want the trees to be a little bit taller, I'm trying to kind of match the reflection here. So I'm kind of working in reverse, making the actual trees kind of line up with the reflections down here a little bit. And the viewer's mind's eye will fill in the blanks. They'll look at that and say, okay, that makes sense. That's the reflection. So to get the darker browns, burnt sienna, and again, if you picked up a little bit of a dark blue with that, it'll give you a really rich dark color.
What color of blue?
Indigo.
Indigo.
Yeah. So I'm just kind of trying to create the impression of some textures here in the trees. This is pretty red down here, so I'm going to throw in a little bit of that sienna. Yeah, the burnt sienna.
When will this video be on so I can watch it? No?
Should have it by Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Can we just look him up under his name?
He'll upload it to his Facebook page.
Oh, it'll be on there. Okay.
I'm going to need as much help as I can get.
Where is it going to be?
On his Facebook page, I'll have a link to it, and then also links to his website.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah. So that's the basic idea. So you've got these warm, rusty colors in a non-perfectly uniform, taller to shorter. And then just the landmass with kind of a mixed green. And so that was the blue and the quinacridone gold. We'll do adjustments to this later. This is just kind of your base coat. And then just kind of try to reflect or kind of replicate the opposite shapes with your reflection in the water. And this will be played with. We'll adjust this too, because later we'll do some ripples in the water and we'll have some foliage. So just remember that this is a base layer, and we'll build up off of that. Just in general, go from darker towards lighter. This is probably a little too dark, but it can be, you can soften things as we learned with the sky. You can do it now, or you can still do it later also.
Do you have a suggestion for a different red than that Viridian red or whatever?
The Venetian.
Oh, Venetian red.
If you have just a regular red, Sandy, like a cadmium red,
Oh,
take cadmium red and you want to go to the opposite side of the color chart. So probably red with a little bit of blue.
okay.
Try indigo blue with cadmium red, and then if that isn't working, get a little bit of yellow.
Okay.
I'll come by and check on it. But if you put all three of those primary colors together, you're going to get a dark, rich, tertiary, earthy color. But red and indigo blue is what I would start with.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Ken, I see you always use the tubes. Is there a preference? I mean, is that just a preference